Okay, so I'm Catherine Lundoff, and I have a book coming out on Monday, which is kind of amazing. But apart from that, I'm a writer, editor, and publisher from Minneapolis. I run Queen of Swords Press, so you can find me at the vendor pop-ups after this, later on this afternoon. And the book that I have coming out on Monday is Blood Moon. This is the second in my series of Wolves of Wolf's Point novels. They are about a group of middle-aged women who are changed by magic into werewolves. So menopausal werewolves. The first book is about the protagonist, Becca, coming out, finding a new community, finding herself, and turning into a werewolf. She is coming out as bi. She has a crush on her next door neighbor. Stuff happens, wacky hijinks ensue. So book 2 has a murder mystery subplot and a romance subplot. It's told in alternating chapters between Becca and Erin, who's her girlfriend. Erin is in recovery, which is a critical element to the plot. And I'm going to read a bit from the first chapter, and we'll go from there. Erin Adams looked out at the mountains and tried not to think about what was in the trunk of her car. At least the mountains around Wolf's Point were still as beautiful as ever. She wondered if she'd get the chance to run through them again, feel the wind in her fur, the ground flying by under her paws, the pack at her side. That thought was enough to make her look back at her car. Erin rubbed her aching forehead with one hand and closed her eyes. This was, without question, the worst thing she'd ever done, even if she couldn't remember doing it. But maybe there was still time to call Shelley and get her help to figure a way out of this mess that she'd blundered into. That was what pack alphas did, or so Shelley kept reminding her. But that might make Shelley an accessory if they got caught, or rather, when she got caught. Erin closed her eyes for an instant. Lying was never a thing that she'd been good at, or wanted to get good at. Anyone she called would almost certainly go down with her. That thought weighed her down like a rock. The pack couldn't afford to be without its alpha so soon after they got her back, not to mention what it would do to Pete and the kids. There was no way that she could drag Shelley into this. Her thoughts turned to Becca, waded through a jumbled mess of emotions, and came back with a single realization. They'd suspect her first. Becca was her friend, her housemate, her something they still hadn't defined, but which felt more like girlfriend every day. Her stomach did a slow, leisurely flip when she thought about that, and she almost smiled. But this wasn't the time to think about Becca. She couldn't afford to be distracted, to be vulnerable. Not now. Maybe there was another solution, a way to hide what had happened. But then what? She'd still know, and she'd have to carry the burden of what she'd done alone. And she knew where that road led. Falling off the wagon to cope with her guilt wasn't an option either. Besides, if she ditched the body out here and it was found, the regular wolves would certainly get blamed for it. The new governor was already pushing for a wolf hunting season, and that would put things right over the edge. She didn't want that on her conscience either. The wild wolves were kin as much as they were cover for the pack, as well as being important to local ecology. Erin ran her fingers through her short-cropped brown hair, wondering if there was anyone else she could turn to. But she couldn't think of any pack member who'd be able to do anything about the situation, not more than she could do herself anyway. It certainly wasn't the sort of thing that her AA sponsor had signed up for, or any of her friends for that matter. So she was on her own. There was nothing for it but to lie in the bed she'd made for herself. She pulled her cell phone out of her pocket and selected contact. Hi, it's Erin. I've done something. Can you just come up to Spruce Point? Yes, it's important. I want you to see it before Sheriff Henderson does. She clicked the phone off and glanced toward the road. Nothing to do now, but wait. Scene change. Becca Thornton looked around Peterson's hardware and sighed. Inventory was the worst. Better than unemployment, of course, but hands down her least favorite part of her job. How could she have possibly miscounted the 3/4 inch screws twice? She stared at them ferociously in their little plastic case as if she could compel them to give up their exact numbers with her mind alone. Are you trying to levitate them or something? Shelley Peterson appeared at Becca's side, her expression as baffled as her tone of voice. No. Becca put the screws down and stretched slowly, her muscles cramping a little from disuse. Not like they had before she started to change into a wolf once a month, but sore all the same. She twisted around, then back again, limited by the narrowness of the aisle. I think I need a good run. How about you? Shelley grinned, her dark eyes lighting up for an instant, almost golden in the store lights, then shifting back to their usual black, the change too fast for a normal human to follow. But she shook her head. And leave Pete to deal with this on his own? Not really fair, is it? She picked up the box of screws. How about you work the counter for a little while and I'll count pointy bits of metal? Becca grimaced and shrugged. That's why you're the boss. I'll take some stuff with me and work on inventory between customers. She got to her feet, thrilled once again at how effortless it was for her to stand up now, with hardly a creak or an ache. It was almost as if becoming a werewolf was its own weird little fountain of youth. She grabbed a couple of containers of loose nails and tried not to grin at them. Shelley gave her a half smile, responding as if Becca had spoken out loud. I don't miss the classic middle-aged knee pop, that's for sure, or any of the other aches and pains. Pete even asked me to bite him last week to see if I could get his back to feel better. Like that would work around here. She rolled her eyes and sat down on the stool before picking up the container of screws. Becca chuckled and hustled over to answer the phone. Wolf's Point's werewolves were not like the ones in the monster movies, at least not in most respects. You joined the pack because the valley's magic called you, not because another werewolf bit you. She shivered at that thought. It would have been horrible to join the pack by way of one of her friends or neighbors nearly mauling her to death. Her thoughts rolled on from there at full speed, like they didn't have an off switch. Now she found herself wondering if getting bitten by one of her pack and surviving it would make one some kind of super wolf or something. A memory of the wall paintings in the pack's cave made her wonder about that. There were more than a few unusual looking and quite possibly superpowered wolves depicted in that artwork. If she was being honest with herself, she found them kind of scary even when they weren't running around the cave chasing off would-be werewolf hunters. It had been only 2 months since she, Shelley, and Aaron had called upon the cave's magic to protect them from the werewolf hunters who had them trapped in the cave. The wolf in the back of her brain stirred sluggishly, sending a surge of adrenaline through her. Her thoughts might have gone on next to the werewolf slayer leaders, Annie and Anderson, one transformed into a monster and living in hiding somewhere in the mountains, the other slain by the living paintings, but the store was suddenly full of customers. It was several minutes later that she realized that Shelley was taking a call of her own on her cell. What? Becca could hear the snarl in her alpha's voice from several yards away. You did what? Why? No, never mind. Where is she? Explain it to me when I get there. All right, I'm on my way. Shelley shoved her phone in her pocket as she lunged to her feet and surged toward the front of the store. Her eyes were gleaming gold as she leaned across the counter, her body taut and tense. Listen, Becca, I need you to stay here and keep an eye on things. Aaron's been arrested, and I need to talk to Lizzie about it. I'll call you as soon as I know more of what's going on. She started for the door, pausing with a jerk when Becca leapt out from behind the counter and grabbed her arm. You can't just leave me with that. Damn it, Shelley, I thought we were past all these pack secrets need to know stuff. What happened to Aaron? Why would Lizzie do something like that? Becca could feel her heart begin to race, the wolf running under the surface of her skin. Control, control. She chanted the thought to herself. Shelley's lips tightened, and for a moment, Becca was afraid that she was just going to push past her and leave her to writhe in agonizing uncertainty. I don't know more than this. She called Lizzie and turned herself in. She's confessed to murder, and there was a body in the trunk of her car. Lizzie said that they haven't identified it yet, and Aaron doesn't remember what happened. I'll call you as soon as I know more. I promise. Shelley squeezed Becca's shoulder before vanishing out the door. Becca grabbed the edge of the counter to stop the store from whirling around her. Aaron would never kill someone in cold blood. Well, not as a human anyway. She was too kind, too honest, too... But what if it had been Annie? The werewolf hunter leader was still free, running in the mountains in a monstrous half wolf, half human form, and unable to change either way as far as any of them knew? What if she'd attacked Aaron and Aaron fought back? Or what if one of the others survived the explosion at their trailer and didn't get arrested afterwards and was back for revenge? Or maybe there was some new threat, something the rest of the pack hadn't seen yet. Her brain spun with the possibilities. Most important of all, how was she supposed to stay put at the store and act like nothing was wrong when everything in her screamed to go and help Aaron? And that's the end of that chapter. So I'll stop there and turn things over to Lloyd. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Catherine. So this is the opening to the project I'm working on right now. The working title is The Relic. It's about a disgraced gay monk who is given a fake relic to deliver to someone, and on the way, the fake relic begins to give the monk magical powers. So it's about belief and power and institutions and all the stuff that I seem to be obsessed with. So Brother Magnus knew he was about to be punished. Without saying those exact words, Father Xavier, prior of the monastery of San Fortunatus, had made that clear after dawn prayers yesterday. He'd ordered Magnus to return to his cell then, instead of taking up his regular early duties of feeding the livestock and mucking out stalls. He was to fast and pray and reflect upon his sins until summoned. The prior's lizard smile told him exactly which sins were foremost in his mind, as his lips stretched back to his ears, disappearing into a thin, hard smile full of secrets. Men's faces turned into a lizard's when they protected themselves with lies. Magnus didn't understand why, but it happened. He'd first seen it 4 years ago when a married man who'd often bedded Magnus pretended not to know him when he said hello in the village square. Each time, the man's face had turned scaly and a strange green that paled to the color of fresh cream along his throat. Waiting now in the Lord Abbot's antechamber, Magnus distracted himself from his empty stomach as well as his uncertain fate, letting his gaze wander over the colorful hunting scenes painted on the walls. In one, an antlered stag, already pierced by arrows, leapt at an impossible angle away from 3 brindle hounds, as if he could fly. A hunter mounted on a horse readied his spear. Another blew his horn. Too big for the central figures, a spirited tangle of vines, flowers, and birds surrounded the hunting figures, a merry fence holding them prisoner. He avoided giving more than a glance to the dark, heavily carved door he would soon pass through. On a table next to the door, a bronze bust frowned at him under his cardinal's galero. The polished furniture smelled faintly of beeswax. Tall brass candlesticks glowed in the afternoon light streaming in through the single tall window. Although the bench he sat on had no cushion, he didn't mind. He wasn't much used to sitting anywhere during a workday. Would he be forced to leave the monastery? Magnus had been happier here than he'd ever been in his home village. He loved the animals and the hard work. The overarching tranquility, the sense of shared and quiet purpose, had given him sweet belonging. More than pursuit of any worldly ambition, belonging made him happy. The first night the prior had summoned Magnus to his apartment and ordered him to disrobe. He'd understood that sex with Father Xavier would be necessary to remain at San Fortunatus. Magnus had taken his simple vows to enter the juniorate only days before. and should never have acquiesced. He saw that now. But he'd chosen to comply, thinking it was a small price for the happiness he'd already found in his year as a novice. How could desire for happiness bring so much trouble? The brief glories of sex, even when good, had brought him trouble more often than not. Something tickled his foot, and he looked down. A large winged ant, red and black-bodied, crawled across his instep. He held his foot perfectly still and watched, amused, overcome with a gentle sense of encouragement for the little creature, caught up in its beauty. He couldn't tell where the ant was going, but he hoped it would get there without too much difficulty. No doubt many dangers lay in wait for it, especially indoors where flying ants were not welcome. Alates, the winged ants. It was the season for them, and they were everywhere. This one stumbled along the hemp rope of his sandal as if drunk, falling off only to climb back on, reversing direction, flashing its wings now and then, catching the angled afternoon light. It would shed its wings soon. On their way to Vespers a few days ago, Brother Bernardo, the master gardener, had told him they flew only for mating, a brief few days. Such was their lot, he'd said with a finality that made Magnus shiver. To be able to fly only for such a short time seemed to him a harsh fate. Perhaps it was better not to fly at all. The carved door opened and a stony-faced secretary peered at him. "Enter," he commanded, although his disapproving sniff said he'd really rather Brother Magnus stayed out, as if he still smelled of sheep and cattle manure, which he knew he didn't, as he'd bathed and even washed his robe only yesterday. He rose, swallowed against a dry tongue, and entered. The room was full of so much light it hurt his eyes, and so many books, red, black, green, and brown, with gold lettering on their wide spines. Titles, mostly in Latin, two that he could see in Spanish. He lusted briefly to touch them all, hold them, read them one by one. The air was warm and thick, smelling of leather and incense. Behind a dark wood table that gleamed in the blazing light of the long windows, a pale round man in yellow and green robes sat in an ornately carved chair, the back of which seemed to rise halfway to the ceiling. The Lord Abbot. The great chair, almost a throne, made the man look small. Even though he appeared shorter than an average man, he easily had twice the girth. His white hair stuck out in coarse wisps from under his amaranth skull cap, and enormous eyebrows spread wild and thick, nearly meeting above a long hooked nose that divided the slack folds of his face. It was an unkind face. Magnus scolded himself that he judged the Lord Abbot by his mere appearance. He searched the face more closely, hoping to find some hint of other traits to reprove his shallow judgment, a spark of humor, traces of joy, even gentleness, and failed. To the Lord Abbot's left, in a much less magnificent chair, half the height of the throne, sat Father Xavier, looking pious and humble, with his eyes closed, pale, soft hands folded atop a small plain wooden box. Father Xavier did not look up, as if lost in the ecstasy of prayer. Brother Magnus stood behind the very plain stool on his side of the table, head bowed, waiting to be instructed. "You may sit," the Lord Abbot wheezed. "Let's not waste time." "Thank you, Father Abbot." Brother Magnus wished his voice hadn't cracked. He sat, folded his hands in his lap, and stared at them. He should have cleaned his fingernails more thoroughly, He could do nothing about their roughness, but he should have taken more effort to get the last bits of dirt out. The Lord Abbot cleared his throat. Father Xavier reports that you've made vain and wanton advances, advances of a carnal nature, toward him over many months, that he refrained from denouncing your behavior in hope that you would find your way back to the path of virtue, to confess and seek penance on your own. What have you to say to this? Brother Magnus looked up. Across the table, Father Xavier's face had become a lizard's again, smooth, cold, and serene. Arguing that it was actually Father Xavier who had repeatedly initiated advances of carnal nature would certainly be met with outrage, which wouldn't help him. Who wouldn't take a prior's word over his, a mere junior monk working in the barnyard with little more than a year since his simple vows? Contradicting Father Xavier would be taken as rebellion, and Holy Scripture taught rebellion was dire as the sin of witchcraft. Besides, it wouldn't be honest to deny his trespasses. Magnus had decided that as he'd fasted and prayed. After all, he was, in fact, guilty. He had broken his vow of celibacy often. It didn't matter with whom. He deserved punishment. He hadn't refused. But neither would he accept the prior's lie. He kept his gaze up so the Lord Abbot would see his knowledge of Father Xavier's deceit, if he chose. Father Xavier knows the truth of this matter. Truth is sacred. Father Xavier's eyes flew open, eyebrows raised. He looked to the abbot, who scowled across the table at Magnus. Surely you're not suggesting Father Xavier lies. Magnus pulled in a deep breath. It was so tempting to say yes. Doctrine teaches us, he replied carefully, that a prior has proven himself insusceptible to worldly entanglements and to all untruth, for all such frailties have been purged from him through long and faithful devotion to the divine office. Father Xavier is our prior. Ergo, yes, quite. The abbot cleared his throat again, sharper this time. The Abbey of San Fortunatus has no place for a junior monk who so shamelessly flaunts his youthful comeliness, tempting those who have taken their solemn vows. The abbot stretched out his hand toward Father Xavier, who gave him the wooden box he'd been holding. In his admirable compassion, our prior has petitioned on your behalf, asking that you not be summarily expelled, but instead be given the opportunity to redeem yourself through service. That's the opening.
Hey, everybody. I'm Ames Leibowitz, writing as A.M. Leibowitz. And I am super excited because I normally write contemporary literature, but this is my first contemporary fantasy. So I'm going to be reading from my upcoming novel, Every Time We Meet, which is a time loop story, kind of, if you've seen Groundhog Day, kind of like that. So I'm going to be reading an excerpt from Every Time We Meet. Heidi met Cass near the main stage, and they bought dinner inside the large food tent where local restaurants had set up shop. There were some tables inside, but they headed outside. They sat at one end of a picnic table already occupied by a family with a baby and a preschooler. One of the parents was wrestling to get the preschooler into a stroller despite the child's loud protests. The other was wrangling with a jar of baby food while the little one opened and closed their mouth like a baby bird. Any other time, Heidi would have had to hide her amusement. She'd been there and done that, and usually had a third child in tow as well. By the time she'd had both Max and Jilly, Kate had been old enough to be helpful, which is to say, not very helpful at all in that situation. Even now, Heidi thought fondly of the times she and Evan had done that sort of thing. They'd herded kids for the sake of being out of the house and introducing them to new experiences. Well, they'd done a damn good job. Kate was ready to fly off into the world on her own. Max was confident on stage, and Jilly had been wonderful at the recital. Heidi thought that would be a good place to start, a way to break the ice. She knew Cass was still frustrated with her, but Heidi wasn't going to let a whirlwind day stop her from moving the two of them forward. "Hey," she said, putting her hand on top of Cass's. Cass shifted her gaze from the family next to them back to Heidi. "The recital was great. You're so good with those kids." Heidi smiled and rubbed Cass's hand with her thumb. "Thank you." Cass visibly relaxed. Heidi was sure putting together the recital must have been stressful, so it was nice to see Cass beginning to let the tension go. This was her moment. "I wanted to ask you something." Heidi looked down at her red osier sandwich, cooling in its box. So romantic. "Oh?" Cass withdrew her hand and picked up her fork. She'd settled on Indian food from a different booth. On reflection, Heidi wished she'd done the same. Feeling in her pocket, Heidi sucked in her breath when her hand landed flat. Where the box she'd so carefully put in this morning go? She looked down and saw the button was gone too, probably ripped off during one of her mad dashes from one place to another. Trying to calm down, Heidi told herself she didn't need a fancy ring to propose. It didn't help. "What's wrong?" Cass asked. Heidi deflated and let go of her shirt. "I was going to make it all romantic and everything. I wanted to do it this morning before the entire day ended up as a heap of chaos. But I was late, and then you couldn't stay, and the ball game and play practice and the recital." Cass's eyebrows shot up. "What do you mean?" "I wanted to ask you to marry me, but now I've even lost the ring." Heidi closed her eyes. When she opened them, the woman at the other end of the table was smiling at the two of them. Cass was silent for long enough Heidi didn't have to hear her answer. At last, she said quietly, "I don't think getting married is a good idea for us right now." Heidi knew it was coming, knew the minute Cass didn't jump into her arms and hug her and tell her the ring didn't matter. That didn't make the rejection hurt any less. "I had a feeling." Heidi kept her gaze on her unappetizing meal, trying to keep the burning in her eyes from becoming fully formed tears. "It's not," Cass stopped. "I was going to say it's not you, but that would have been a lie. I love you, Heidi. I do, but I can't live with the constant dramatics and messes. Today shouldn't have been about needing to wait for you at every turn. I even had to move Jilly around on the program for you, and it's not my fault you couldn't be up in time to meet me. I just can't do this, not on a permanent basis." She stood, and that was it. There was nothing more to be said between them. Heidi wasn't sure if Cass was breaking up with her or simply saying they shouldn't get married or something halfway in between. It didn't matter. Either they were done and would exchange terse smiles at Jilly's lessons from now on, or they would slowly stop reaching out to each other. Maybe Heidi should consider hiring a new teacher. She watched Cass go, and the woman at the other end of the table, now finished feeding her infant, gave Heidi a sympathetic look. Maybe she'd been there too before meeting the man who was hitching a backpack higher on his shoulders. Heidi stood and grabbed her uneaten food and the rest of Cass's trash. She tossed them in the nearest barrel and wandered along the path toward the other vendor booths. By then, the band had started to play. Leather Anvil. She and Evan both liked them, but Heidi remembered Cass wasn't a fan. She'd only agreed to the concert because Heidi liked them, and they were opening for a band Cass wanted to see. Heidi remembered now who it was: Generation Xerox, an up-and-coming local 90s grunge cover band. She ducked in and out of foot traffic, occasionally stopping to look in a booth. Ahead, she saw exactly the one she wanted. They were selling CDs of the bands. Heidi thought to get one since she was missing them now. Their latest, Sonic Pixie Dream Girls, was great. Heidi'd gotten a couple tracks online already. As she reached the booth, someone shoved her hard from behind. She lost her balance and flew sideways, crashing right into the tent. She hit the table, rattling it and causing CDs and other merchandise to slide. There was no way to stop gravity. Heidi landed on the grass right next to a pile of leather anvil keychains, banging her head on the table legs so hard her ears rang. In an instant, someone was down next to her. "Are you okay?" Heidi blinked. She felt all her limbs. The top of her head hurt where she'd smashed it, but otherwise she was okay. She'd had presence of mind enough to know not to put her hands out, so no broken wrists. She didn't even see any blood. "Yeah," she said, "I think so." "Can you stand?" The other person held out a hand. Heidi took it and braced her hand on the table. Once she was upright, she scanned her body. Everything seemed to be in order. "Thanks," she told the stranger, and then her mouth dropped open. This was the first she'd gotten a good look. It was definitely her, Angel Flores. Heidi had seen her face plastered on city buses with her morning co-host. There was no mistaking it. She had a knitted rainbow beanie covering her dark hair and just showing the full row of earrings down each ear. Instead of the casual but professional outfit visible on the side of the bus, she had on a black leather anvil t-shirt and jeans. Heidi wasn't surprised to see a branching tattoo that began at her wrist and ended somewhere up under the t-shirt's sleeve. Her matte purple lips curved into a smile, and Heidi realized she'd been staring. She flushed, and now Angel laughed. "Come on," she said. "Let's get you to a bench. I'll grab some water." She reached into a barrel full of ice and a Wegmans bottled water, pulling out two. Heidi couldn't hear the exchange, but Angel said something to the other two people in the tent who were cleaning up leather anvil merch. They waved Heidi and Angel off. There was a place to sit near the stage where all the children's events were held. Some group was there now, one Heidi didn't recognize because she no longer had kids young enough to bring them. As she sat, she realized she was a little dizzy. Whether it was from the fall or from being so close to Angel was anyone's guess. Angel opened one water and handed it to Heidi. She took the other herself and sipped it, silently watching the kids' concert. After a few minutes, she turned her attention to Heidi. "I'm Angel," she said. "But I take it you knew that." Heidi, and yep, from the radio. Heidi giggled nervously. "I listen to you every day on my way to work." "Yeah? Where do you work?" 23-hour surgery at General. I'm a nurse's aide." Heidi took a big gulp of water, closing her eyes and enjoying the feel of the cool liquid sliding down her throat. The throbbing in her head eased, and she opened her eyes to look at Angel. "So you also moonlight selling leather anvil gear?" "Something like that," Angel laughed. "Being a morning show host is great, my dream job. But I also do some publicity stuff for Leather Anvil. I've known Martina my whole life." "The lead singer? No way." Heidi shook her head. "I love them. I was on my way to get one of the CDs when, well, you saw what happened." "People are so rude. That guy definitely didn't need to shove you to get through." Angel put a hand on Heidi's arm. "Are you really okay?" "I am." Heidi flashed her a grin to reassure her. "Physically, anyway. Not so sure about the rest." She deflated, thinking about how horrible the day had been. "No need to worry," Angel said. "The others have it under control back at the booth. I was just there to hang out. No harm done, and as far as I could tell, even the table." She elbowed Heidi, but that cute half smile was back, the one that told Heidi that Angel was amused. Angel obviously had it wrong. Sure, Heidi was a little embarrassed about her mishap, and she was definitely a little warm in Angel's presence, but it was everything else, all the way up to and including dinner with Cass, that had her heart sinking. She had to go home soon and tell the kids what happened. They all loved Cass. Heidi had thought she loved Cass. It's not that, Heidi said before she could think about what was coming out of her mouth. Maybe she'd been hit on the head hard enough to lose her inhibitions. I proposed to my girlfriend and she said no, which was the perfect end to this perfectly sucky day. Heidi set the water next to her and put her head in her hands. Even the music from the kids' concert seemed to be mocking her. Oh, I'm sorry. Angel patted her back, and for some reason it made Heidi's emotions contort themselves so she was laughing and crying at the same time. I just wish, Heidi said, sitting up and wiping her eyes, that I could have it to do all over again, not make the same mistakes. Do you? Do I what? Heidi frowned. Wish you could have the day back. Yeah, I'd get it all right and everything would be perfect. Dejected, Heidi lowered her head again. There was a small bunch of lilacs on the grass by her feet, probably discarded by a grabby child who had pulled it off one of the trees. Remarkably, no one had trampled it, and it looked fresh. Angel saw it too and picked it up. She handed it to Heidi. Make your wish, she suggested. Heidi laughed. That's dandelions, not lilacs. Angel shrugged. I think it works with lilacs too, especially on the first day of the festival. Still chuckling, Heidi closed her eyes. She willed away her rotten day and all her failed attempts to be everything to everyone. All she wanted was to be the kind of parent who could manage 3 kids' schedules and the kind of girlfriend who lived up to her partner's expectations. Or maybe just her own. She opened her eyes again. You make your wish? Angel asked. When Heidi nodded, she said, now blow on it or it won't come true. Heidi felt silly, but she did as she was told. Nothing happened, not even blossoms falling off the lilac sprig. Heidi shrugged and instead inhaled the sweet fragrance of the pale purple blossoms. Angel stood. I should go back to the booth. Come on, I'll give you one of those CDs. She winked. I happen to have connections. And that is it for me. That's what I had for you guys.
That was a lot of fun. I liked both of your pieces a lot. So.
And I put the link to it in the chat.
Oh, yeah. So let me guess, the lilacs worked.
Well, that's the idea, but maybe they didn't work exactly as Heidi thought.
Oh, what a surprise.
Right?
So we do have a question in the chat and the Q&A. Those were all amazing. Where do you draw inspiration for your characters? They all had such great voice.
Okay, so am I drawing from personal experience? Oh, yeah. I am a parent of teenagers. I have one who's about to graduate high school and one who's a high school sophomore, and they're both in performing arts. So that is, I used to joke that I was happy that neither of my kids played hockey, because that's really time consuming and expensive. And then my kids did theater.
Yeah.
I've carried the idea of the story of the relic in me for probably 10 years. But I didn't really feel ready to tackle magical realism the way I wanted to until last year. So I made notes and so on, but really didn't have the whole story until more recently, and it's really slow going because I want to do it right, but I also want to get a working draft. So I have to compromise with that. But it it feels like it's the fulfillment of a 10-year gestation.
I started writing Blood Moon a while ago, somewhere around 2010. The original version of it came out with a different publisher back in 2012. And it was motivated by a combination of things. I am not personally a werewolf. However, at the time I started writing it, I was 48. I was looking around. I wasn't seeing a lot of representation, particularly of middle-aged and older women in science fiction and fantasy. So it was something I wanted to work with and play with it. So it includes elements of things from my life. It includes things about, what it's like to come out at midlife. It includes things about, being sober, about physical changes as you're entering menopause. There's a lot of stuff that's either drawn from my life or the lives of friends. In the second book, there's a trans character who's coming out, and that's pulled from conversations that I've had with friends as they were coming out, as well as, just things I've read and so forth. So it's kind of a combination of things that are kind of rolled up together to create, what is now a 2-book series, and I'm told to be at least 3 books long. But yeah, no, not a werewolf, not a vampire, none of those interesting things.
Sure.
And then the next question's for Lloyd.
Oh, what is it?
Oh, the next question was for Lloyd. I'm sorry, I
Oh,
didn't
I
mean to
see it
interrupt
there
you.
now.
What is it?
Lloyd, there is
Oh,
some
yeah.
great religious undertones and overtones to the story. How do folks react when you weave religion into queer fiction? How does it reflect your own experience as a gay
Oh,
man?
okay. Well, in a previous life, I was a minister. Um, and when my life changed and I came out, I left that job. So there's a lot of, let me pull up your exact wording on this so I get it right. Oh, no open questions anymore. Um,
There's a tab. You can see it under answered.
Oh, okay.
It'll show up under either answered or dismissed. So,
Okay. Um, I wanted to, yeah. Uh, my experience is that a gay man in a religious institution brings a different stream of devotion and kind of the heart magic that very often is lacking in Western religion, and I that really plays into where I uh, where I got Brother Magnus. But the story is really about transformation, um, because I think that's one of the gifts that queer people bring is an impetus to transform rather than to conform. And Magnus at some point changes his name, and it's not a happy ending for the romance folks. But he turns into a tree to become part of his lover, and he belongs to the world in a way that actually fulfills his first longing to be with life and beauty. So I and yeah, that's my that's certainly been my experience of in following my natural wiring rather than conforming to what I was told God wanted.
Lloyd, I see there's another question for you in the
Oh,
Q&A about your research.
oh, okay. Um, yes. Well, I studied classical and medieval history in college a million years ago when it was much closer to the medieval period. Um, but I didn't want to make it strictly uh, European medieval paradigm. So I've pulled it into a kind of Southwest North American uh, uh, setting without saying so, and bringing in the tradition of witchcraft, which is actually what helps transform him. And it's so it's partly technical research, but I think the main thing is seeing where the research opens doors for the story that was pushing to come out. For what that's worth.
Okay, we got our 5-minute warning.
Okay. Well, that went fast.
Yeah, and somebody asked us to repeat the titles of the books that we read from.
Oh, okay.
All right. So I read from Blood Moon. This is up for pre-order now. It will be out Monday, 2 days,
Oh my
2 days.
gosh.
So I've already got my temporary tattoos of little wolves and stuff. So I'll be posting pictures of that and all that good stuff. Silver Moon, which is the first book, is on sale today at Smashwords for half off. So if you'd like to read the first book before you read the second book, it's out there, and they're available everywhere, including at Queen of Swords Press, which is my small publishing company.
Great.
I'm so excited to read that.
Yeah. I read from The Relic, which is a magical realism, fantasy, mystical story, and who the hell knows when it's going to come out, because it's not even finished. So I'm sorry to dangle that, but I've got nothing current to offer.
I read from Every Time We Meet, which is a contemporary time loop fantasy, sort of magic in the real world kind of thing. And that will be out May 1st. And I did put the link in the chat to the publisher's website, which has all the other links on it.
Great. Well, thanks for showing up and listening to us. And thank you, AM and Catherine.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a lot of
Fun
fun
to work together. Yeah.
And Scott, the answer to your question is, I'm not sure if I want to be a werewolf. Do you have a way to make that happen?
Trust Scott.
Hey, I'm curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to answer Scott's question about my research. Did I watch Groundhog Day repeatedly? Well, yeah, that is one of my favorite movies, but I like anything with time loops. So I will watch any movie, read any book, anything with time loop. It's my favorite. It's my favorite plot device.
Interesting. Okay, time for a cup of coffee. Thanks, folks.
Seriously, thank you guys.